the way that I'm going to attempt to do this is through visual imagery. I have a PowerPoint presentation which looks at some of the extant structures, material structures for the most part, including gates and walls, the Theodosian walls, a few other things. And some of the main churches, the Cathedral Church of Hagia Sophia, for instance, Hagia Irini, Holy Peace. But at some point, those slides run out, and I apologize that I didn't have time to incorporate my other photos into the presentation. What I'll do then is I'll go to my hard drive and just open up photos for you, which are of the later churches, principally from the 10th century onwards, that you can still visit, monasteries like Constantine Lips and various others that are now, no longer churches, but you can still go and see them. And this would give you a feel, I think, for the way that the city would have looked like, the city of Constantinople, the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, the queen of cities, before it was conquered by the Ottomans in 1453. So let's begin. I'll share my screen. And before we begin, I'm very grateful to Father for giving me this opportunity to share some of these photos that I took myself, actually, when I was in Istanbul for a research trip a decade ago now. So it was 9 years ago, towards the end of 2010, beginning of 2011, January 2011. I was wandering the streets of Istanbul with a colleague and a friend who was showing me around to a lot of these churches and monuments. So I'll just share my screen. And I took this photo, which you see here. So lecture in theology, I'll just make this change now. I took this photo here when returning from Heybeliada, which is one of the islands in the Princess Islands in the Sea of Marmara, to the south of Istanbul. Of course, Constantinople, Istanbul, is surrounded by 3 bodies of water, which is what made it so defensible for its 1,000-year history and duration. The Sea of Marmara to the south, the Bosphorus to its east, and to the north, the Golden Horn. And I was coming up on a ferry boat from the south and kind of reaching around the easternmost end of the peninsula, because the city is on a peninsula. And that photo was just a chance shot on my SLR. I can't pretend that I knew what I was doing. What you see there is Hagia Sophia in the center. Of course, you need to imagine that in the past it had its minarets, and the Blue Mosque to the left, which was built in the 1500s by the Ottoman architect Sinan in imitation of Hagia Sophia, though he couldn't quite get the dimensions of Hagia Sophia. And it's a nice sunset there. There are the sea walls, which you can't make out in this photo because it's, of course, been obscured by the shadows. But we'll take a closer look at Hagia Sophia as we go through. So now, this is not going to be a formal, lecture. I'm just going to show you some of the, and I'll try to refer back to the map so that we know where we are, we get a sense of the topography. I'm just going to show you some images of extant monuments. So here's the Golden Gate of Theodosius I, which you might not have learnt about in this particular subject with Father Anastasi. You would have addressed it in the previous one, because it was built during the reign of Theodosius II in the 450s AD as a response, the Golden Gate's down here, incorporated into the Theodosian Walls, as a response to the emperor setting up the Theodosian Walls after hearing about the second sack of the old capital of the empire of Rome in the 450s. So Rome was, of course, famously sacked in 410 by Alaric the Goth. In the 450s, it was sacked a second time, and the Emperor Theodosius held several days of mourning for the city before building these walls, for the city of Rome, before building these walls to protect the new Rome, Constantinople. And the Golden Gate is at the southwesternmost end of the beginning of the peninsula here. And this is the gate that was reserved for triumphal entrances into the city by emperors after they had gone on a campaign somewhere. They would return with a lot of pomp and ceremony through this gate. What remains of it now is, of course, a mere shadow. It is a mere shadow of its former self. The gate is actually, it was based on the Roman triumphal arches, which often had 3 gateways, sometimes just 1. But here you see one of the arches in the center. It's been bricked up, of course. It was probably bricked up originally by the Byzantines after they couldn't defend it, but later on the Ottomans would have shored it up even further. You see, it's kind of modeled on a classical Roman arch. This is the Arch of Constantine that was set up to commemorate the Emperor Constantine's victory over his rival Emperor Maxentius in the year 315 AD, which is next to the Colosseum in Rome. So you can see the same kind of shape as part of the Golden Gate. That is the other side. So if this is the gate from the front, the second layer of the gate from the inside, because there's another row of walls there, in fact 2 rows of walls. This is the second inner row of walls that we're looking at. Behind this inner row of walls, you can wander around what is known as the Gicu Fortress, which was how the Ottomans referred to this, to the Golden Gate. They had built towers around it. There are 7 towers, in fact, which were later accretions installed by the Ottomans after they conquered the city, but we're just concerned with the Golden Gate. What's very interesting is that if you pass on the underside of the Golden Gate, that's me from 9 years ago, near the walled up central arch of the Golden Gate, you will see Christian symbols and images like the Christogram, the first 2 initials of Christ's name, which points to the fact that gates, and here is the outer line of walls of the Golden Gate, which also has crosses on it. You can see a cross there and a cross here. It points to the fact that gates had a symbolic function, not just a utilitarian one, that as one passed into any city in Christendom through its main gates and then onto its thoroughfares, a transition was undertaken, or was supposed to be undertaken, between profane and sacred space. Now, not everything in the city was sacred, but this act of crossing the threshold from the outside of a city, a Christian city, and Constantinople was the Christian city par excellence, to the inside of a city is like the transition from profane to sacred space. And this was exemplified in Constantinople by its many churches, hundreds of churches in the city. So we're going to look at some remains of some of them today. This part of the gate is, of course, attached to the Theodosian walls. The part of the walls that I'm showing you here are at the proximity where Mehmet II, the conqueror, was able to penetrate the walls and enter the city on the 29th of May, 1453. You see this green patch of land here? Just next to it, there was, I remember when we went, I have photos of it somewhere else, but I don't think it's that necessary to show you, the 1453 Museum, which is a circular dome structure that commemorates the victory by the Ottomans over the Byzantines. And it's a very nationalistic Turkish building. If you walk in, you go into a panorama in the circular dome, which has a fresco that depicts the fall of Constantinople from the Ottoman vantage point. So, you know, triumphantly from their point of view, tragically from the Christian point of view. The reason why that museum is there is because this is the spot where Mehmet was able to breach the walls for the second time in the city's 1,000-year plus history. So it was pretty sturdy. Here's a recreation of the Theodosian walls, rebuilt section. And they haven't, the modern Turkish government has not reconstructed all of the walls, just parts of the walls to serve as examples for what they might have looked like. So if you look at the, so basically I went and stood somewhere up there. If you look at the, from the rampart into the cross section here between the first line of walls and second line of walls, you'll see that this area actually would have worked like a parapet where soldiers, archers would fire their volleys against invaders. Now there's a service station across the road from it. And this area in front of the first line of walls, which is now used as farmland actually, or, you know, they grow, it's used to grow crops, and there were chickens and a whole bunch of other things. This would have been a moat. So you'd have a moat, and moats usually have drawbridges, so they would have crossed over this area here. And then you'd have the first line of walls, and if the invaders managed to cross the moat without getting cut down, and then the second line across the first line of defenses, the first line of wall, they would be shot down from this rampart here, the second line of defenses. And that's what the rampart looks like as well. You can visit this. I mean, it's there's a soccer stadium here. It's quite a public area, but with some degree of caution, because it's not necessarily the most. It's not like the Darling Harbour district, you know. Hagia Sophia is in that area, and it's much safer. But you can walk across the length of the walls if you want, and across these ramparts as well. This is the Aqueduct of Violence, which was built in the 5th century by the Arian Emperor Valens in order to transfer water to the city's many cisterns. I can show you images of some of those cisterns. The most famous ones, which are near Hagia Sophia, are the cistern of Constantius, Constantine's son, another Arian emperor, and the cistern of Justinian, which is quite extraordinary, quite large. I always found it funny that the Romans were able to build cisterns in such a way that accommodated our modern cars, because the traffic passes through the arches in that, aqueducts, in a way that accommodates our modern cars, because the automobiles there pass through the arches in the aqueduct, as you can see. You can walk across the length of this too, the Aqueduct of Violence. And that is, just to give you an idea, so we were here at the Golden Gate. The Aqueduct of Violence is in the middle of the city. And of course, whenever an imperial procession was undertaken from the Golden Gate down the Mosaics, the main thoroughfare, which led to the various forums in the city, the Forum of Arcadius, the Forum Bovis, the Forum Tauri, which later became Theodosius II's Forum and Constantine's Forum. There would be special sort of litanies and whatnot conducted at various churches just off the main thoroughfare until the imperial procession made it to the easternmost edge of the city, where the Cathedral Church of Hagia Sophia was and is, and the Hippodrome and the Imperial Palace. So we just looked at the middle of the city now. Let me go back to the... So somewhere, because I remember seeing, it's somewhere near the Aqueduct of Violence, it's just off the Aqueduct of Violence, is the column of the Emperor Marcian from the 5th century. And it's in a heavily, densely populated part of Istanbul. You can go and visit that too. This, of course, has stood through from the 5th century to today. So it's a 1,500-year-old column. It could even be older, because it depends where the Emperor Marcian took it from. Marcian is famous also for writing, for convoking the Fourth Ecumenical Council. He was one of the emperors responsible for convoking the Fourth Ecumenical Council, if I'm not mistaken, in the mid-400s, in 451. So the Emperor Marcian's column, you'll see here, is very interesting because it has a relief of two Nikis, which are the victory goddesses from the ancient world, but here they are to be interpreted as angels, and they're holding a victory wreath. Here we see one of the earliest examples of the appropriation of the Nike victory figure, assimilating it with angelic figures. Not to say that angels are borrowed from the Nike, they're not, because we know that angels appear in the Old Testament before any such creatures appear in Greek mythology. But here we have, at least in terms of the artistic motif, an appropriation of the Nike with holding a wreath, and inside the wreath, the way that Christians took this image and infused it with Christian content is by putting within the wreath a sign of victory, the Cairo, the cross, either the cross, which is what it looks like here, or the first two initials of Christ's name, the Christogram. As you walk further down the Mosaic, so like I said, the column of Marcion is somewhere around here. As you walk down the Mosaic, you end up at the Forum Tauri, which means bull. Tavros in Greek is a bull. It was a place that was used to sacrifice bulls to the pagan gods before the city was built upon by St. Constantine. And you'll see remains of columns on either side of the freeway, which is now there. And these remains of columns actually were part of what was known as the Theodosian Forum. It was a massive tetrapylon arch that extended from one side of this road to the other, that the Emperor Theodosius had set up. And the fora are used for public discourse, for markets, public speeches and whatnot. Let's continue our journey down the Mosaic, the main thoroughfare, to Constantine's Circular Forum, which is a place where, according to Philostorgus, the 5th century Eunomian, which means basically Arian historian, says that Constantine began construction of the city, or the reconstruction, because there was an existing city on the site called Byzantium, which is where we get the word Byzantium from. And he changed it to Constantinople and to New Rome, but the inhabitants would from time to time call it Byzantium as well. The word itself is not an innovation in terms of the way that one can refer to Constantinople. The word Byzantium is not itself an innovation. What is an innovation is the Enlightenment scholars' use of the term Byzantium in a pejorative sense, which is, of course, something that you've addressed probably with Father Anastasian. It's something we don't agree with. When we refer to Byzantium, we think of the Orthodox Christian Roman Empire. At Constantine's Forum, the point from which he began construction on the city, you have his porphyry column, which is still there. Acts as a bit of a roundabout, actually, these days. The porphyry column had on its top, and this is something that has to be very much nuanced in presenting it to you. It had on the very top an image of the sun god Apollo with the facial features of Constantine. And some people have taken this image, which was no longer there. It fell actually from the top of the column in the 11th century after a lightning storm, and it was replaced by, it might have been Manuel Comnenus, the emperor, with a cross. So the statue fell, was destroyed, and was replaced by a cross, because the sensibilities 700 years after the statue was raised, in 330 AD, when the city was founded by Constantine, that's when the statue was put up there. The sensibilities, by the time it fell down in the 11th century, 800 years later, it changed remarkably. People did not want the pagan statue on the top of the column. It doesn't necessarily mean Constantine. So Constantine built many, many churches around the city of Rome. He ringed the old Rome with churches built on martyria, or built as martyria, on the places where the martyrs were buried and where their relics were. He built churches in the Holy Land. He built churches in Constantinople, though only a handful, because by the time he finished work on the city in 330 AD, he started work in 325. Well, he had been getting on in years, and by 337, 7 years after the founding of the city, St. Constantine had reposed in the Lord. What this pagan image points to is the long-standing millennia, I use that in the plural deliberately, long tradition of founding cities in the ancient world as dedicated to the gods, and the ruler was involved in this process and had to always style themselves as a representative of the gods or as a god. So you see this going all the way back to ancient Mesopotamian cities in modern-day Syria and Iraq, but it's also something that appears in Egyptian cities, ancient Egyptian cities in Greece and in Rome. And so Constantine could not extricate himself from this particular practice. He did a lot to cut off the pagan elements to his reign. He wouldn't accept sacrifices. He publicly promoted Christianity. He did a lot of things, but this is something that he could not avoid. It was a far too long-standing a tradition. At the same time, the city was founded on the feast day of the Saint Martyr Mochius, who on the 11th of May, who was a martyr under Constantine's predecessor Diocletian. Now, that's here. You can see it to this day. Actually, it was known. It's known by the Ottomans as the burnt column, because it was burnt by fires in modern times. There's another interesting column. To Fortuna, who returns by reason of victory over the Goths. So to fortune, dedicated to fortune as an abstract concept. It's somewhere down here near the Imperial Palace, and I don't know when that column was raised. Columns are raised in order to, because they're placed up high, it's to symbolize victory for the most part, or a kind of an intersection between heaven and earth, because of their vertical orientation. If you make it to the easternmost edge of the city, now it's all shops, and Hagia Sophia is there. So there it is in plan. You can go see Hagia Sophia. You can see Hagia Irini. In behind Hagia Sophia, here you'd have walls now, because what happens is the Topkapi Palace, which was the Ottoman palace that was built over the Byzantine great palace structure, and encompasses all this area around here. That was that kind of divides Hagia Sophia from Hagia Irini. But in Byzantine times, Hagia Sophia and Hagia Irini, holy wisdom dedicated to Christ as the wisdom of God, holy peace dedicated to Christ as God's peace, were part of the great church complex and could be accessed from the great palace in various ways. This is the area we're entering now. Now there are many shops here. There's a little park somewhere up here near this cistern. You can pick up your Turkish pies and kebabs up here. This basilica cistern is Justinian cistern. You can visit that. You kind of pay for a ticket and you go downstairs. You can see the cistern. What we're interested in, however, is this structure here known as the Milion. If we scroll down, once again, I'll show you the remains of the Milion, although they are not impressive at all. It would have looked something like this structure squared, let's say. So, or in 3D, because it was a tetrapylon. So let's say that's one pylon, that's another. So there was another one behind it, and it would look like a block. And at the very top of this tetrapylon was the cross, a statue of the cross, with Constantine and Helen on either side, Saints Constantine and Helen. And that's the basis for the iconographic depiction of Saints Constantine and Helen in the Orthodox Church, this great image, which was on top of this great statue of Saints Constantine and Helen on either side of the cross, on top of the Milion. What does the Milion mean? Well, the Milion is an abbreviation of the Miliarium Aureum, the golden millstone or milestone, which was a vertical bronze column on top of the rostra in the Roman Forum in the old Rome, in the center of the old Rome. The rostra was the main speaking platform. There was a gilded bronze column there, which was called the Miliarium Aureum, the golden millstone, and it had inscriptions to the distances to every city in the Roman Empire. Byzantium, Constantinople, the new Rome, had its equivalent, because now this was the new center of the Roman Empire. So if you're going to measure the distances to other cities in the empire, you have to do so from the new Rome, the new center of the Roman Empire, and that was Constantinople. So the Milion functioned as a replacement for the Miliarium Aureum in the old Rome, the Milion in Constantinople. All that remains is this piece of Roman concrete. That's all. And we know that that's part of the Milion, but that's all that remains. The Augustine square, which was next to the Milion, this area here, Augusteus, you see, this area here is the Augusteus. Okay, so this area, and that was part of the Great Palace district. You'd have to enter through the Halki Gate, which was further down in this direction. That's now car park, as you can see. And then if you turn to the right, you'll see Hagia Sophia. There's Hagia Sophia. Justinian's church from the 6th century, which you can enter and have a look at it now. It's a museum. Of course, it was a mosque for several hundred years. You can also go to the Hippodrome, which is here, right next to Hagia Sophia. Of course, you have the public worship and center of the city next to the public displays of celebration and everything else in the Hippodrome with the horse races. They're modeling in this way ancient Rome and other ancient cities. And the central line of the Hippodrome is right here, known as the spina or the spine. And in the Hippodrome, which is now park, you will see various obelisks that Theodosius II and others, forgive me for that, got from ancient Egypt. So you can wander around this park and see all these things. Now, on this end, where I stood to take this photo of the Hippodrome, there would have been the starting gates of the Hippodrome with very famous horses that might have been from Alexander the Great's time, or more likely they were by the Greek artist Lysippus, dating from the 2nd or 3rd century AD, not the 3rd century BC. Either way, they're very old, and this is what they look like. Those are around, those horses, but those horses were knocked off of the top of the starting gates of the Hippodrome by the Venetians when they besieged and conquered Constantinople together with the Franks during the Fourth Crusade. And so they took them back to Venice, and you can see them in the Museum of San Marco in Venice, the Church of San Marco, the Basilica Church, which if you go and visit it one day, you will see that it's in a cruciform design with 5 domes, the church. And it's modeled on another church that was in Constantinople but was destroyed by Mehmet II when he conquered the city. This church was known as Holy Apostles, and it was on the other end of the city up here, the Church of the Holy Apostles. It was a mausoleum church which contained the bodies of all the Byzantine emperors from Constantine's time onwards. That was summarily destroyed by Mehmet II soon after he conquered the city as a sign. It's a symbolic gesture. You destroy the burial chamber of the previous rulers of the city in order to make way now for yourself and your descendants, your subsequent successors to be buried there. And he built the mosque on top, known as the Fatih Mosque, the Mosque of the Conqueror, which you can go and see actually where Mehmet is buried there, if that is something you're interested in. I went looking for any remnants of the Church of the Holy Apostles, but I found nothing. So if you go through the Hippodrome, so I'm trying to show you various structures and use them as a springboard to describe the circumstances or their history, and circumstances that relate especially to the latter part of the empire's history, because I know that that's what you've been doing this semester with Father. So you've got the obelisk of Theodosius, which dates back to 1500 BC there. So it's 3,500 years old. The Romans had a practice, because they despoiled Egypt. They, of course, conquered Egypt after the Greeks had conquered Egypt. And they would take obelisks, which was seen as a sign of the imperial authority of the Egyptians. And in fact, there were ancient Egyptian pharaohs erected obelisks in order to demonstrate a connection between themselves and the sun god. If you look at an obelisk, it's an inverted, petrified sun ray. That's meant to represent a ray of the sun, but it's pointing upwards. The Egyptians built them to show their connection with the gods. It had to do with triumph. It had to do with power. The Romans, of course, were more powerful, so they would take the obelisks and bring them back as bounty to their cities. And Theodosius I took this one, and here he is in the Imperial box of the Hippodrome, which would have been, to go back to the other map that we were looking at here, the Kathisma. So it was here. It was here on this side of the Hippodrome. That's where the emperor would sit to watch the races, and he could access that from the Great Palace district. He'd make his way there through a series of walkways, and in such a way it was protected as well. You have some of the serpentine column, which dates back to 479 BC, so also very old, 2,500 years old. The serpentine column had 3 serpents' heads on the top. It was erected, I think, after the Battle of Plataea, and it's meant to demonstrate a connection between the Byzantines and their ancient Greek predecessors. It was moved here by Constantine, the serpentine column, along with other symbolic statues and images from ancient Greece and Rome that were placed within this central aisle, the spina, the spine of the Hippodrome, around which the horses would race, in order to demonstrate that Constantinople, the new Rome, surpassed all previous civilizations, and their monuments of victory are now huddled in the center of the circus of the Byzantines. So it's a way of demonstrating the superiority of Byzantium. That's the Sfendone, the back end of the Hippodrome, which you can still see to this day. And that's the only remaining seat of the Hippodrome, but it's in the grounds of the Blue Mosque, a senator's seat of the Hippodrome. It's the only seat left, and it would have held 100,000 people, so it was huge. Back when I was there, I don't know what's built there now, there were excavations around the area of the Great Palace, and you could see the subterranean sort of foundations of the Great Palace, you know, like here. And around the corner from this was the Great Palace Museum, where the mosaic floors from the Great Palace, which was eventually abandoned. This palace here was not serviceable by the 10th, 11th century, and I think it was the Comneni who moved the palace from here to Blackernai, which is up here somewhere. Oh, no, further up. What am I talking about? It's up here somewhere. Blackernai is on the other side of the city. They moved it. And they did it rather deliberately to be closer to the agrarian, because here you'd have a lot of farmers, agrarian side of the city, kind of closer to their subjects. The Great Palace was functioning as a Great Palace at least up until the Comneni, and especially after the fall of the city to the Latins, when the Byzantines, the Lascaris family and Paleologi reconquered the city after the fall of the city to the Latins in 1204. They went to Blackernai, and that's where the Imperial Palace was, not next to Hagia Sophia. So this is from the old Imperial Palace, and these are floor mosaics from the Great Palace. Probably, if not by Constantine, certainly Justinian, because he redesigned and rebuilt the Great Palace. You have children playing with geese, a monkey reaching for a coconut. A lot of exotic imagery, mythological imagery, like a griffin, a mythological creature eating a lizard, leopards devouring a deer. Okay, I got this wrong back in the day when I said a pagan deity, possibly Zeus. This is a green man. A green man was a pagan motif of like a forest spirit. But this doesn't mean the Byzantines are pagans. They used this as part of the storytelling and part of the mythology of their past. But they were Christians. Here is Blackernai Palace, built originally in the 6th century, but redone in the 11th. So it was the Comneni who used it as a palace. You can make your way, if you make our way back from this area here, Blackernai, to the Imperial Palace, to the south, just on the shores of the Sea of Marmara here, you can actually see the water from this church, which is now a mosque. You will find the Church of Saints Sergius and Bacchus, which is the first octagonal and domed church that was built within Constantinople and acted as a sort of paradigm for Hagia Sophia. Justinian had this church built first because he wanted to test the dome and see if it worked. It is octagonal in its design, in its central design. Octagonal arches distribute the weight from the dome to the foundations. And these are, the number 8, of course, symbolizes God's kingdom, the eschatological 8th day, which is beyond the recurrent week of time, symbolized by the number 7. So there's symbolism to this. The number 8 in the church, in the church's sacred numerology, almost always designates God's kingdom. And there's Hagia Sophia with its second dome. The first dome collapsed. The first dome was actually something like this. It wasn't perfect. It kind of went up like that and it collapsed. It's the second perfect dome of Hagia Sophia. Try to imagine it without the minarets and with a cross on the top, without the grey buildings either. There are some, if you go to the front of Hagia Sophia, the entrance is actually, this is looking at it. It's often looked at this way, but this is looking at it from the south. The entrance is in the western side here, and the eastern side is there. If you enter from the eastern side, you might see remains of the second church built by Theodosius II in the 5th century, the second Hagia Sophia, because actually Justinian's church, built in the 6th century, is the third iteration of this church. It was initially built by St. Constantine, might have been completed by his son Constantius, but that church burned down in the 5th century, after which it was rebuilt by Theodosius II. That church was demolished with the Nika revolt in the 500s, and Hagia Sophia built this masterpiece. It was the largest church in Christendom until the construction of St. Peter's Basilica in the 1500s. So if you go into Hagia Sophia, if you enter through the narthex, the entrance is up there somewhere, you will see the imperial gate leading from the narthex into the nave. And as one enters from the narthex into the nave, you have a mosaic up here which shows the Emperor Leo the Wise from the 10th century in obeisance to our Lord Jesus Christ, seated on a throne with a Panagia and probably St. Gabriel in medallions on either side of him. And this was a way of the church after iconoclasm, which you would have addressed in this particular subject. This is a way of the church demonstrate, no, you would have done it in the previous one probably, of the church demonstrating to the emperors who's the boss. So after iconoclasm, maybe 50 years after iconoclasm, this mosaic was set up over the royal doors, which was the entrance reserved for the emperor and his entourage from the narthex into the nave of the church. And they had to see one of their kind, an emperor there, in obeisance prostrated to Christ precisely in iconographic form, thereby showing them that your place, emperor, is at the feet of Christ and to listen to the church. In other words, don't ever try to impose heretical policy onto the church ever again. And that's the nave of the church. Of course, you have these giant medallions with Islamic calligraphy, verses from the Quran now. You have this the midrab here, which points towards Mecca, and various other things that are accretions, but these two, well, not this one, this seraphim or cherubim is original. This used to be, so if you try to imagine it without the calligraphy and the mihrab, sorry, not mihrab, mihrab, this was the altar area of the great church. And you have various interesting ancient items, like this marble urn, Saint Gregory Thaumaturgos's pillar, the coronation square, or the omphalos, which is where emperors were coronated in Hagia Sophia, and it was also called the omphalos because it was considered the center of the world, the place where the emperor was consecrated. You have this wonderful mosaic of the Panagia holding Christ with Saints Constantine on her left-hand side, our right-hand side, dedicating the city to the Mother of God. And you have Justinian dedicating Hagia Sophia to the Panagia. And there you have the Mother of God in the apse, very famous image that's from the 9th century, the Mother of God in the apse of the, just over the altar of the church. Saint Gabriel on in the arch, which makes up the part of the apse. It's part of its design. I think many other images from Hagia Sophia. You have, of course, the very famous Deisis mosaic of the Theotokos and Saint John the Baptist in supplication to Christ, Pandokrator, Christ Pandokrator here. And this dates from a later period. This is from, I think, the period of the Komneni, so 11th century. You have immediately opposite the Deisis mosaic, the burial place of Enricus Dandolo, the Venetian doge who led the attack against Byzantium by the Franks and the Venetians and conquered it in 1204 in the Fourth Crusade. But I don't think his bones are actually there, but that's where he was buried. And then you have various other mosaics, the Virgin holding Christ flanked by Emperor John II Komnenos and the Empress Irene. See, I wasn't the best at taking photos back then. You can see it's a bit blurry, but I managed at least something. Christ with the Emperor Constantine Monomachos and the Empress Zoe, figures that you'd be familiar from this subject. And then if you go outside of Hagia Sophia, you see Hagia Irini, the Church of Holy Peace from the 6th century onwards. What you will find extant in this church, and that's the best I could do because there was a barrier preventing me from taking this photo. This is the altar area of the church, but you have an apse which has the only existing image of iconoclastic art. This cross was put there by the iconoclasts in the 8th century, and it's the only lasting example of iconoclastic art. In the atrium, just outside the church, you have porphyry sarcophagi, which can also be found in Istanbul's Archaeological Museum. These sarcophagi are from the Church of the Holy Apostles that I spoke about earlier, that was demolished and replaced by the Mosque of the Conqueror, and they contain the bodies of Byzantine emperors. Little beknownst to me, this one here has been surmised, and if I had known, I would have taken a closer photo, by the scholar Jonathan Bardil to be Constantine the Great's sarcophagus. But I don't think there's any way to really tell. So those are the main sites that I wanted to show you.